So Karl-Heinrich Marx is a German philosopher, economist, historian, sociologist, political theorist, and also a revolutionary socialist. So he's born from 1818 and then until 1883. He lived in the German. So he's discovered a theory of Marxism which served as a basic for a large portion of contemporary socialist and also communist ideology. So Karl Marx has influenced by the other philosophers, socialists. One of them is Adam Smith and also Ricardo. So Marx has studied their ideas, their research is about labor as a source of value and also the theory of surplus value and economic distribution. So the next, Marx also inspired by the French utopian who uh, imagine the cooperative and also the equity societies. And the French Revolution has also influenced Marx's belief on the power of revolutionary change and also the role of shaping history. Same as well to the Darwin. So Marx has read and also studies his works, journals, ideas in 1860. We have a strong connection between Darwin's natural science and also his own ideas, perspective on society and also economics. So both of them are emphasize the dynamic view of the world, who nothing stay the same and everything is shaped by conflict and also revolution. So the last person who influenced Marx, which is Hegel. So and also this is the one of the largest influence on Marx, which is the Hegel's dialectical method. Okay, so this method is talking about the history move forward through some stages, which is thesis, antithesis, and also synthesis. So Marx has modified his notion, his idea, and using it to formulate his own theory of historical materialism.
Welcome and hi, my name is Muhammad Hakim Imam Fairul and my message number is 297259. So now I will be talking about the Marxist stage theory, also known as the historical materialism. So this theory, developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, that explain how human societies evolve over time through different economic systems. So the key driver of changes in this theory is the mode of production on how we produce and distribute goods and the class struggle that emerge from it. So the first stage is called the primitive communism. This existed in the early human societies that were like hunters and gatherers where everything was shared. There was no private property, no government, and no social class. People worked together to survive, and there was equality because no one owned more than others. But once agriculture and surplus developed, inequality began. So next came the slave society, which is the first class based society. In this stage, we see a ruling class that owns slaves who are forced to work without pay. Private property and state power emerge, and societies like ancient Greece and Rome are key example of this theory and this stage. This system boosts the production, but it was based on exploitation. So now we will move on to the next stage, which is the feudalism, where land becomes the main source of wealth. During this stage, the lord owns the land, and the peasant, also called as the serf, work it in return for protection. During this stage, class mobility was almost impossible and the power was inherited. And this system dominated Europe during the Middle Ages. But after the feudalism collapsed, the capitalist stage emerged, where we still use it until today. Here, the bourgeoisie or capitalist class owns the factories and businesses. The working class or proletariat sell their labor for wages. And the capitalism encourages innovations and growth, but it also creates inequality and economic crisis. According to Marx, the system will eventually collapse due to the internal contradictions. So for the next stage is the socialism, the transitional phases. In socialisms, the workers or the state acting for them and control the means of protection. The goal is to reduce the inequality and meet people needs rather than generate profit. It's a step forward to a fairer society with less class conflict. Finally, Marx envisioned communism, a society with no classes, no state, and no private property. Everything is owned communally, and everyone works according to their ability and receive according to their needs. While this stage has never been fully realized, Marx believed it would represent the end of exploitation. So, for the conclusion is the Marxist stage theory explains history as a process driven by material needs and class struggles. Each stage, from primitive communism to capitalism, contains contradiction that lead to the next. It's a powerful way of looking at how society changes and why inequality persists. So that's all from me. Thank you.
So Karl Marx has come out a law which is law of motion for capitalists. So the meaning of law of motion is refers to the inherent dynamic processes that can govern how a society, especially to the capitalist society, to develops and also change over time. So under law of motion, there's many of theory ideas. So the first one will be the labor theory of value. So Karl Marx has concluded that the community value is actually equals to socially necessary labor time, which is the direct labor plus the embedded capital or labor. And this theory has rejected with the Ricardo's relative value. So the second will be the exploitation and surplus value. So Karl Marx has also concluded that, and he using the labor power compared to a labor time, which is the ability to work compared to the actual work. So the capitalists actually pay the subsistence wages, but the extract surplus value, which is the unpaid labor. And then Karl Marx also come out how to calculate the rate of exploitation, which is reusing the surplus value divided by the variable capital. S divided by E, divided by V. So the third one will be the following rate of profit. So Karl Marx also come up with the formula which is Q equals to C divided by C plus V, which is the rises of mechanization and also using knowing the profit rate to determine how the falling rate of the profitation. So the fourth one will be the businesses crisis and also centralization. So when we overproduce, we causing the business crisis, and then we concentration of the capital is going to decrease. So this thing will happen. The credit system accelerate about the monopoly. So under the theory of exploitation, there are some of the theories that is important. So the one of the theory is the labor theory of value. So this one is state out the value of a community is actually determined by the amount of socially necessary labor time to require to produce. So for example, we if we produce a table we use 5 hours and then we produce a chairs we use 10 hours. So in theoretically, the chairs is worth twice as much as the table because the chairs is took twice as much the labor time to produce it. So the second will be the surplus value. So the surplus value is the differences between the value that produced by the labor and the wages paid to the labor. And then the difference, which called the surplus value, is appropriated by the capitalist, which is the employer, as a profit. So for example, a worker is paid by $100 for a work for a day, but they produce or they work for a work that worth with $300. So the surplus value, the differences is 200, $300 minus $100. So the $200, the surplus value, will goes to the employer, which is the capitalist, as a profit. So the next one is the capital accumulation. So it's referred to the reinvestment of the surplus value, the profit. Okay, we use it into the businesses that can generate more profit. Okay, so for example, an employer have made 1 million profit, and then he used for 70%, okay, to build another factory, okay, or buy any machine or hire more workers. So this process we call reinvestment. So he using this 70% of the profit to generate more profit. So this we call the capital accumulation. So the last one will be the class conflict. So the class conflict, or we call class struggle, is the struggle between the different classes in the society, okay, mainly between the capitalist class and also the working class. For example, when a workers go on strike for better pay and the company resists, okay, the company reject due to the profits concern. But actually they concerns about the class conflict. Okay, so we can see the diagram. Okay, so this diagram is about the summary of the law of motion. So under law of motion, there's a many of the consequences, the theory, the ideas that come out by the Karl Marx. So the starting point of the law of motion is the labor theory of value. So it's talking about the workers, the laborers are the source of all value. Okay, so there will be indicating to the theory of exploitation, but the labor does not get all the value. Okay, because the capitalist pays the labor the value of its labor power, but the amount, the pay, is less than the value of the output, less than the value of the produce. So the differences we call the surplus value will appropriate by the capitalist in some of the form of income. Okay, so the surplus value is a source of the capital accumulation. All right. So based on the capital accumulation, that has produced three ideas, which is the falling rate of profit, the business crisis, and also the technology unemployment. So all these three bolster will cause a many number of the unemployed, and also directly or indirectly to affect the workers. So the de- the falling rate of the profit and also the business crisis will also cause the centralization of the capital and the concentration of wealth as well. And then, based on all the consequences, based on all the ideas, eventually will come out the class conflict. So this is the summary of the law of motion.
Now I'll be relating theory of history to Charles Darwin theory of natural selection. First of all, who is Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin, born in 1809 and passed away in 1882, is best known for developing his theory of natural selection, which he introduced in his groundbreaking 1859 book on the origin of species. His theory explained how species evolve over time through a process of struggle for existence. So in this struggle, There are two types of traits, which is favorable traits and unfavorable traits. Favorable traits are those that help an organism survive and reproduce. They are preserved, while unfavorable traits are those that reduce survival and they are gradually eliminated. This idea was revolutionary because it challenged traditional views of creation and laid the foundation for modern evolutionary biology. Darwin's work didn't just impact biology, it also influenced thinkers in other fields. For example, Karl Marx himself, which is the famous philosopher and economist, read Darwin's book in 1860. Marx saw parallels between Darwin's natural selection and his own theory of historical materialism. He even wrote to his colleagues, which is Friedrich Engels, saying that Darwin's book is the book which contains the historical natural basis for our views. In other words, Marx believed Darwin provided a scientific framework that supported his idea about how societies evolve through class struggle and economic forces. So, in summary, Darwin's theory of natural selection not only transformed the field of biology, but also resonated with major thinkers like Karl Marx and influencing idea about human society and progress.
Hi, I'm Asmini Ananili, metric number 297603. Okay, now I will continue with an explanation on how Darwin influenced Marx. Marx saw that just like animals evolve, social classes can evolve too. He said that society is kind of like a living thing. It changes, grows, and sometimes struggles to survive. Marx believed that history isn't fixed. It's always moving and changing. Darwin's work helped Marx explain that change happened from inside, from conflict and struggle within the system. So overall, Darwin helped Marx show that class struggles were not just random, they were part of a natural process of change. Next, let's look at what Darwin and Marx had in common. Both of them believed that struggle is what makes things change. Whether it's animal in nature or people in society, things don't stay the same without some kind of fight or problem. They also believe in slow changes over time. Nothing happens overnight. It takes time for things to grow and develop. Now Darwin was focused on natural evolution, like how species change and survive. Marx, on the other hand, looked at social and economic evolution, like how classes and societies change. Marx also used some of Darwin's ideas to help support his own theory, to make it sound more scientific and natural.
My name is Shalini Raj, metric number 297989. So let me introduce you to George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, one of the most influential philosophers of the 19th century, born in Stuttgart, Germany in 1770 and passing away in Berlin in 1831. Hegel is best known for his contributions to German idealist philosophy. His most significant idea is the dialectical process, where contradictions are resolved through synthesis, leading to progress in ideas and history. Hegel's work didn't just stay in the world of philosophy, his ideas strongly influenced Karl Marx, especially the concept of dialectics, which Marx adapted for his own materialist view of history. So Hegel laid the foundation for some of the most powerful philosophical debates in history. Now let's move to Hegel's academic career. Hegel's academic journey began at the University of Jena between 1801 to 1807, where he started building his philosophical reputation. Later, he took on a leadership role at a high school in Nuremberg, where he not only managed school affairs, but also wrote some of his major works. In 1816, he became a professor at the University of Heidelberg and soon after at the University of Berlin, where he succeeded the most famous philosopher, Johann Gottlieb Fichte. During this time, Hegel published the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, which remains one of his most important contributions. Through his academic roles, Hegel developed a thought and the complex ideas that shaped modern philosophy.
A very good day to doctor. My name is Jusuyi, metric number 297924. Now let's continue with the dialectical process. So, the dialectical process is also known as Hegelian dialectic. It's a method of thinking that involves examining the ideas through their contradictions and finding the resolutions. The dialectical process involve three structures, which is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The first structure is thesis. It is the existing social or economic system. It has its own internal structure and contradictions. Now let's look at the historical example here. Feudalism was the dominant social and economic system in medieval Europe. Nobles own the land and they have their own political power, while the peasants, or we call it as serfs, they worked the land and were born to it. This system provided order but limited economic growth, social mobility, and also lack of individual freedoms. Now the next structure is antithesis. It's a new arising force that opposes to the old system, and it also highlighting its own contradictions. Now let's look at the historical example here. The bourgeoisie is the new emerge of capitalist class, began to grow in wealth and influence through trade, commerce, and early manufacturing. The people demanded for the rights towards their own property, engage freely in market, and pursue economic opportunities outside the feudal restrictions. This class directly challenged the social and economic hierarchy of feudalisms. The third structure is synthesis. It's a new system formed by resolving the conflict. It also becomes the new thesis in the next cycle. The historical example here is that the capitalism emerged as a new economic system. It replaced serfdom with wage labor and feudal estates with market economy. This system allowed for great economic freedom and innovation, but also introduced contradictions. For example, class conflict between capitalists and workers. Next, we look at the influence of Hegel on Marx's theory of history. Marx adopted Hegel's concept of the dialectic, which is the idea of history unfold through the contradiction and their resolutions. However, Hegel saw this as an idealistic process driven by the evolution of spirit or mind, or we call it as Geist, whereas Marx turned it on its head and developed materialistic dialectic. For Marx, it was not ideas, but material conditions and economic relations that form the basis of dialectical development.
So moving on to the next slide, this slide shows a comparison between Hegel and Marx, highlighting their different approaches. Hegel believed in idealism. He thought that history and reality unfold through the development of ideas. His dialectical method focused on the conflict of ideas, leading to synthesis or new ideas. Marx, however, turned this on its head. He believed in materialism. He argued that history is driven by material conditions, especially economic and social factors. While Hegel's focus was on abstract ideas and state development, Marx concentrated on real world class struggles and economic systems, especially in capitalism. In short, Marx took Hegel's method but applied it to real life social and economic issues. Thank you.
My name is Nomasha Alani Bitino Kairi. My metric number is 297270. So today I will be talking about Ludwig Feuerbach. So Ludwig Feuerbach is a 19th century German philosopher. Even though he was just a philosopher, his ideas has give a significant impact in the development of history of economic. He played a big role in moving philosophy from idealism to materialism. Idealism focuses on ideas and the mind, while materialism focuses more on the physical world and human experience. Feuerbach is best known for criticizing religion. He believed that religion was a human invention. It's a way for people to project their hopes and values onto an imaginary god. So, his ideas influenced another famous thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They built on materialist views to develop their own political and economic theory. So, in short, Ludwig Feuerbach helped shape modern philosophy by challenging religious belief and inspiring other thinkers to focus more on real-world issues instead of focus more on their religion. Now, let's talk about Feuerbach materialism. Firstly, he rejected metaphysical and divine explanation of the world. Instead, he focused on real, observable human experiences, which is things we can see, feel, and study. Next, he focused on human condition, where he believed that to understand human life, we should look at the actual human condition, not spiritual or supernatural beliefs. Thirdly, his influence on Marx, where the shift from spiritual to material life strongly influenced Karl Marx. Feuerbach helped Marx to move away from religion and philosophy, and instead towards studying society, economy, and material needs. Next is materialism versus idealism. Feuerbach emphasized that matter and tangible reality over abstract ideas. So, he believes on abstract idea instead of something that is reality. So, this was a break from idealism, which focused more on thoughts, concept, and the mind. Criticism of religion, where one of Feuerbach's most famous idea is not divine truth, but a projection of human values, where he believed that humans are the one who shape religion, not the other way around. He said that humans take ideal traits like love, wisdom, and power, and imagine a God who has all of them perfectly. So, in summary, Feuerbach believed that instead of searching for truth in heavens, we should look at the real life of human things here on earth. So, he doesn't believe on idealism. He mainly focuses on materialism, and he doesn't believe on the he doesn't focus on religion. Instead of he focus on the real world and the progression of humans. Now let's talk about how Feuerbach influenced Karl Marx. So, while Feuerbach focused on understanding the world, Karl Marx took it a step further, where he turned passive materialism into active social change. For Marx, it wasn't enough to explain the world, so he wanted to change it. Marx agreed with Feuerbach about focusing on real human life, but he added something important, which is economics and class struggle. He believed that the way people work and who controls the economy will shape the society. Okay. He also had criticism on Feuerbach, where he believed that he said that Feuerbach didn't pay enough attention to history, power, and politics. Marx wanted to understand how human life changes over time through conflicts and revolution. So, he replaced Hegel's idealism, where Hegel thought ideas shape history, but Marx said it's the material condition like work, money, and class that drive the history forward instead of ideas. So, and then Feuerbach also saw religion as a projection of human desire. Marx agreed, but he also said that religion is a tool used by the powerful to control the poor. It keeps people passive and obedient by promising happiness in the afterlife. So, in summary, Marx built on Feuerbach ideas, but he made them more political, more historical, and more revolutionary, which is a better way of the Feuerbach ideas.
Let's begin Marx's theory of history, also known as historical materialism. According to Marx, history is driven by ideas or belief, but by material conditions. This means the economic structure of a society, who owns the means of production and who performs the labor, fundamentally shape everything else. Marx believed that economic systems like feudalism, capitalism, and socialism determine the structure of society. This system create class struggles, conflict between the rich and the poor, which drive historical change. He introduced the concept of the base and the superstructure. The base or economy determines the superstructure, which includes culture, politics, and law. When the economic base change, everything else in the society must adjust accordingly. Next, building on this foundation, Marx outlined a progression of historical stage. History, he argued, moves through specific phase. First is primitive, second is slavery, then feudalism, capitalism, and lastly socialism. Each stage has a ruling class and an oppressed class. For example, in feudalism, it was lords vs serfs, and in capitalism, it's the bourgeoisie vs the proletariat. Change happens not gradually, but through revolution. Marx believed capitalism would eventually collapse under its own contradictions, exploitation, inequality, and crisis, and give rise to socialism through a worker-led uprising. The ultimate goal? A classless communist society where wealth and power are shared and exploitation no longer exists. Lastly, let's compare Karl Marx to Ludwig Feuerbach, a fellow German philosopher who influenced Marx early on. Feuerbach focused on religion, arguing that God is a human projection, an idea created by people. He critiqued idealism but didn't advocate for real social change. He also saw humans as passive observers of the world, and his materialism was limited to understanding human nature. Marx took this further. He argued that we should focus not on religion but on economics and class struggles as the real drivers of history. He didn't stop at critique. He called for revolutionary change. Unlike Feuerbach, Marx saw humans not as passive beings but as active agents of change. This is the idea of praxis, where theory meets actions. And instead of limiting materialism to human essence, Marx developed historical materialism, a framework to analyze how class, economics, and conflict shape society. As a conclusion, Marx shifted the focus from abstract philosophy to real-world economic struggles. His ideas continue to shape political and social thought today.
Alright, so as we come to the end of our presentation, one thing becomes really clear. Karl Marx was not just an economist or political theorist. He was a deep and complex thinker, shaped by a wide range of ideas and movements around him. Marx didn't invent his theories in a vacuum. He built on the work of classical economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, especially their labor theory of value. But he went further, introducing his own concept of surplus value, which gave us a clearer view of how exploitation works in capitalist system. At the same time, Marx drew inspiration from French utopian socialists and the revolutionary energy of the French Revolution, which helped fuel his vision of a world without class division, a classless society. But Marx was not just into politics and economics, but he was deeply philosophical too. He took Hegel's idea of dialectics, the idea that progress happens through contradictions, and flipped it. Instead of focusing on the clash of ideas, Marx focused on the material condition and class struggle. That's what we call dialectical materialism. He was also influenced by Darwin's theory of evolution, which reinforced Marx's belief that history moves forward through struggle and contradiction, and thinkers like Feuerbach helped him shift attention and religious ideals to the real-life experience of people, forming the basis of what we call historical materialism. Speaking of that, historical materialism is one of the Marx's big ideas. It's the idea that history moved through stages from primitive communism to slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and eventually socialism and communism. Each stage, Marx said, is defined by a class conflict, especially between those who own the means of production and those who don't. Now, we also included social realism in this project to show how Marx's ideas went beyond theory. They shaped culture and art too. During times like the Great Depression, artists and writers used socialism to show the struggles of everyday people. It was about exposing injustice and inequality, exactly the kind of issue Marx wanted us to face head on. So, when we understand the world Marx lived in and the thinkers he was influenced by, we see why his ideas still matters today. Whether or not we agree with all of them, they give us powerful tools to think about economic inequality, social justice, and how societies change over time. To wrap it all up, Marx theories are not just history, they are still alive today, challenging us to look deeper at the system we live under, to ask questions and to imagine a fairer, more just world, and maybe, just maybe, to change it.